It's Darci from the Kosciuszko County Soil and Water Conservation District. Today we'll look at a model called the Enviroscape. The Enviroscape model helps us see what a community looks like, and this one is purposely flawed so we can see where any water pollution problems can come from. So we're going to look at a lot of different phases of the and talk about the pollution that could come from there. When we talk about pollution, we can group them into two main groups, non-point source and point source. So if you had to guess, what do you think the definition of a point source pollutant is? So point source pollution is just what its name says. You can point to where that pollutant is coming from. It's really easy to identify, and there's no question about where it's coming from. So that's the easy one. How about non-point source pollution? Non-point source pollution is a little tougher. You can't always tell exactly where it's coming from. It may travel some distance with rainwater or runoff. So non-point sources are a little harder to identify where they're coming from. So they're a little harder for us to fix. In Indiana, unfortunately, most of the pollution in our water comes from non-point sources. So we're going to point those different kinds of pollutants out in this model and talk about some things we could do to fix the problems they're causing. So we're going to start at this corner of the model and work our way around. So we have a factory here. So most towns have some kind of manufacturing or factory in it. And if they're following their rules, it's fine. But sometimes there are things that happen, accidents happen, and we can get some pollution from there. So I'm going to use some red Kool-Aid to represent something that might happen coming from an industry. So we've had a chemical spill coming out of this industry. We're going to use the spray bottle to represent rain and see what happens. Do you see how the pollution came through the channel and into our stream? Eventually, it ends up here at the end of the model, down in our lake too. Because this is coming right from a channel and a pipe out of the industry, this would be considered to be a point source pollutant. Next, we're going to look at this hillside. You may notice that it looks pretty bare. This used to be a forested hillside. Now the trees have all been cut, and there's not much vegetation there to hold the soil in place. So I'm going to sprinkle a little cocoa here to represent loose soil on our hillside. Now when that rain comes, the soil is dislodged and it mixes with the water and it ends up in our stream. And then our stream flows directly into our lake. This is a good example of soil erosion. Soil erosion is always considered to be a non-point source pollutant. Next, we're going to go to this little building in the model. This represents a wastewater treatment plant, which all communities have. Part of the process of cleaning our water up involves these settling ponds, the little circle areas in front of the building. So again, this is purposefully flawed to show you bad things that could happen. So if I put some effluent in these, you can see that we have a flaw here that allows it to flow out into our stream. That's not good. So this would be wastewater that wasn't cleaned up properly, but was allowed in the stream. It follows the stream and goes into our lake. This would be considered a point source pollutant because we know right where it's coming from. So we're going to show you several things that could happen in this neighborhood that may not be so good for our water quality. One, the people in this house love to change the oil in their cars at home, which is fine, but it's what you do with that old oil that's important. Unfortunately, they just let it run in the driveway. So we're going to let this grape Kool-Aid represent oil in the driveway. When it rains, it gets moved into the street and into our channel that goes directly into our lake. There are a lot of things that you can do with used oil, and many places will take that used oil and recycle it and reuse it. Never dump used oil in your driveway. Next, I want to talk about fertilizing your lawn. A lot of people like to fertilize their lawn every year, which is fine, but just because a little fertilizer makes your lawn green doesn't mean a lot makes it greener. You should always check and see how much fertilizer needs to be put on by taking a soil test. If you put too much on, which I'm going to do in this house, the grass can't use it, so anything that's excessive just gets washed away in the next rainfall. So let's show you what happens here. So we have the green washing off of our lawns. So not only does it go into the street and the stream, but there's also a little storm drain here. So it could go in the storm drain too. Using a lot of fertilizer is not a good idea. Always put on just what's needed and not any more. In many towns, our neighborhoods are growing, and that's a good thing. But we need to be careful when we disturb the soil to build new houses or buildings. So in this corner of our model, we have a construction site where a new home is going to go. Unfortunately, these folks have not used any conservation practices to hold that soil in place. So again, I'm going to put some cocoa there to represent loose soil. The next time it rains, it's going to wash that soil into the streets. It's going to go down our storm drain here, and some washes across the road into our stream, and it ends up in our lake. Protecting our soils is really important, just not for the soils, but for water quality too. There are several things we can do here to keep this from happening. We have a rule in Indiana called Rule 5. Rule 5 states on a construction site that you have to use conservation practices to hold soil in place. It could be a silt fence, it could be stockpiling topsoil, or it could be planting some temporary vegetation in it until you're ready to finish the project. So this is an easy fix, and this should never happen. So I want to talk about soil erosion just a little bit more. Erosion can be a natural process, just caused by rainstorms. So we're going to look at this stream in the model right now. As you can see, the banks look kind of brown. That means for some reason the vegetation is not there. So again, I'm going to put a loose soil here to represent that. Sometimes when we have a big rainstorm, it can eat away the banks of our streams. When it does that, all of that soil goes downstream, and in our community, that stream ends up in our lake. So even though it's a natural process, there are some things that we can do about that. This is non-point source pollution. Erosion is always considered non-point source. We can help vegetate that bank, or we can put some kind of stone on there to help hold it in place. We have a couple of practices that we can use depending on how much water is flowing and how fast it's flowing. That'll determine which which project is the best one to use there. So even though erosion is a natural process, there are things that we can do to mitigate it. The last area of the model we're going to look at is the farm. So because Kosciuszko is such a big agricultural county, this is a good place for us to look for things too. So we're going to start off. We have some cows here in a pasture that are grazing away. Unfortunately, those cows have direct access to our stream. That's never a good idea. When we do that, cows in the stream drink the water, and what goes in eventually comes out too. So cows may have some waste right there in the pasture or directly in the stream. So if we get a rain, that gets washed into our stream too, and that's not good. So we consider this to be a point source pollutant. And there are a lot of things that we can do to help this situation. We can put a fence along the stream to keep the cows out of it, and then provide another water source up on the hill away from the stream. So there are a lot of things we can do with livestock to help protect our water. Then we're going to go to this section of the farm where it's a crop field. And here in Kosciuszko, again, you've seen a lot of crop fields. It's an important part of our economy. But we need to make sure that we're farming carefully too. So to start with, this farmer hasn't done a very good job. He farms right up to the edge of the lake here. So that's a lot of disturbed soil. When they plant their crops, of course, they have to use fertilizer too. So we'll put a little fertilizer in there as well. When that next rainstorm comes through, though, things are going to start moving. So we have both soil and excess fertilizer washing directly into the lake. So that's a double whammy on this one. So what can we do? This is considered non-point source pollution again because it's traveling with soil and covering some distance. So what we can do, and what we certainly recommend doing, is to put a buffer or filter strip right there along that field so that it can help capture those things before it enters the lake. This farmer could also use something called no-till planting, where the soil is not disturbed heavily, and it makes it loose and easy to move into the lake. So there are a lot of practices that we can use on the farm to help keep our water clean too. Okay. So we've showed you a lot of problems and where they can come from. And I want you to understand that these aren't problems that are always occurring, but they are some of the worst things that could. So now we'd like for you to come up with some great ideas on how can we fix all these problems. So you'll get some materials to help come up with some ideas and maybe sketch them out, and then share them with your classmates.